guys, my name is Yasmina and welcome back to my channel. If you're new here, I make weekly videos on books, writing, and the publishing world, so please make sure to subscribe so you don't miss out on any content. So, book titles. Those are hard, right? I don't think I'm the only one that has issues coming up with the perfect title for my books, and so in this video I want to share with you some of my tips on how to come up with the perfect title for your book. I will also share tips on how to come up with genre-specific book titles. I'll also share with you guys some of my book titles of my own books, and also some resources that you can use right away to come up with the perfect book title. Titles are one of those things that either come to you right away, maybe before you even start writing your book, and other times you can write this book for years and still not have the perfect title, or have a bunch of sort of working titles, but none of them really feel right. And that's totally fine. There is never a right time to come up with a book title. Try not to worry too much, try not to rush it either, because it has to be right, that's the other thing, and you will know when it is. Before we get into it, I also just want to mention, if you're planning on traditionally publishing your book, the publisher will probably most likely change the title for you depending on what they think will attract more readers to it. So if you're planning on traditionally publishing, you shouldn't stress about the title that much. You should just have a working title that you can then query with, because most likely your publisher will change it for you. But if you're self-publishing, then of course you can have any title you want. And even though you really shouldn't rush to come up with a title, I know that for me personally, I like having a title for my works in progress. It just makes it feel more real, and it makes me more motivated to work on it when I can refer to it as something rather than work in progress or book or draft, you know? So I like to come up with it as soon as I can, just so it motivates me to continue working on it. So without further ado, here are some tips on how to come up with a book title. So my first tip is to find the keywords specific to your book. This, of course, implies that you have already written a draft of your book, or maybe, you know, a few chapters, or you already know some of the core themes of your book and what you're trying to write. If you do, try to think of your themes and think of the main plots, the main characters of your book, and try to find some keywords that perfectly describe the themes or concepts in your book. You can do this by just making a list of all of the keywords that come to you, and then try to find ways to then put them together into a title. I'll give you an example from one of my books. I have a book called Hunting Vienna, which is YA contemporary. Vienna is the setting of my novel, and it's a very important part of the novel. It's almost a character in itself. And then my book focuses around a scavenger hunt of historical artifacts and location in Vienna, therefore the hunting Vienna. That's kind of that's how that happened. You just have to mess around with words and put things together and come up with maybe similar words as well. And in that note, another tip is to search those keywords through a thesaurus. I recommend thesaurus.com. It's a great resource for writing in general. If you find some of these keywords, try to put them into the synonyms tab of thesaurus.com and just see what other words come up, and maybe some of those will be nicer words or will fit better with the theme than the first word that you came up with. So what I did, I had words like scavenger hunt, or just hunt, or the verb hunting, right? And initially I had tried to put it in thesaurus.com to come up with other words, but none of them really were better than hunting, so I did end up sticking with hunt and hunting, but it is a great way to come up with other words, so make sure to check that out as well. Another way to come up with titles for your book is from quotes from your book. So read your book back and maybe try to find a word or even a sentence, maybe a metaphor you really like that you feel encompasses the theme and the concept of your book, and you can just pluck it out from your draft and use it as a title. There are a lot of examples of this throughout fiction. I'm pretty sure books like The Fault in Our Stars and Turtles All the Way Down, both by John Green, are actual quotes in the book. Now, of course, I'm not sure if he came up with the title and then just inserted the title into the book so that it's nice and cohesive, or if it was the other way around. However, I just want to let you know that that does happen, and you can, if you're lucky and if you have something like that in your book that really represents your book, you can just take it out and use it as your title. Maybe switch it around a little bit if it's not perfect, but that's just another way to come up with an idea for the title. Another way to come up with titles is by using song lyrics, song titles, or even passages from poems. Now, in terms of song titles, you cannot copyright a title of any kind, whether it's a song or a book or a movie. Titles can be reused throughout media, so don't be afraid if you want to use a song title. Don't be afraid about copyright. With that, song lyrics, on the other hand, there are some copyright rules with that, so please make your own research. If you are planning on using some lyrics from a famous song, please make your own research before taking song lyrics as your title. But that's just something to keep in mind, that you might be able to do that, but please research before you settle on that. If you have a poem that you really like that is in public domain, so it has been published more than 100 years ago, it's out of copyright, so anything like that you can use freely without worrying of copyright. If you don't already have a favorite poem, maybe read some poetry and maybe you'll get inspired and find something that would fit perfectly for your book. My next tip is to research the best-selling books in your genre. Look at the titles of the best-selling books and see what they have in common. Most often than not, you will see a theme. I'll give you some examples of a few genres so you can see what I mean, but take fantasy as a genre. Let's look at some best-selling fantasy books. A Game of Thrones, The Name of the Wind, Throne of Glass, A Storm of Swords, Shadow of the Fox, The Girl of Fire and Thorns. You see what I mean? There is a formula there that you can try to build onto as well. The something of something in this example. But some of the best-selling fantasy do follow that formula, and that's just something that you can try and see if it works for you. You don't have to do it that way, of course. There's always exceptions. You don't have to do it that way. But it's a formula that works really well for fantasy, and it's just something you can try out yourself and see if it fits for your book. The same kind of formula actually is also present in some YA. Again, I'll give you some examples. The Fault in Our Stars, The Perks of Being a Wallflower. Again, the something of something. What's also present in YA as well is two-letter titles, and sometimes one of them is a verb, like a strong verb, which obviously suggests some action, suggests some plot. That's actually a formula I use to come up with Hunting Vienna for my book, because some popular YA titles are Paper Towns, Radio Silence, Every Day. A lot of two-word titles. So if your book is a YA, you can also think about something like that. Another common thing you see a lot is having the character name in the title. So Harry Potter and the, Percy Jackson and the, When Dimple Met Rishi, Anna and the French Kiss, Eleanor and Park. I'm sure you can think of many more, but these are just some examples. Usually this type of formula, especially Harry Potter and the, Percy Jackson and the, is very prevalent in a middle grade fantasy, but again, it's something that can be used, like Anna and the French Kiss. That's a YA contemporary, so it can be used in other genres as well. Again, I'll give you a personal example of how I named my fantasy series and books in that fantasy series. So I have a fantasy series that I'm writing whose series title, working series title, it might change, I'm not sure. Working titles for the series are The Shadelings, and then the first book is called A Ripple of Shadows. You can see how I use the formula for fantasy titles. I kind of implemented it that way. And I love the title. I think it works really well for my book. It's very representative of the themes of my book, and also the series name is very important for my world as well. For YA Contemporary, I have two books that I'm writing. One of them I already mentioned, Hunting Vienna, and then the other YA Contemporary I have is called The Sound of Crooked Hearts. Again, you can see the formula that I used. Fault in Our Stars, The Perks of Being a Wallflower, The Sound of Crooked Hearts. I love that title. That is one of my personal favorite titles I've ever come up with. It just works so well for my book, and I love that title. I'm very happy with it. My next step is to try to eliminate titles that might suggest a different genre than what your book actually is. Let's say, for example, I don't know, if your book is a romance novel, try not to use formulas or titles that are very common in, I don't know, fantasy or horror, for example. You shouldn't suggest a different genre than what your book is, because obviously that's misleading. That's like clickbaiting a video, you know, with a thumbnail that has nothing to do with the content of the video is kind of the same thing. Readers won't like that because they will expect something completely different than what your book is, and that's just not something that you want. The cover and title are super important for marketing purposes because a reader should know from the cover and the title of your book what genre the book is in. And for that, you need to do your research and try not to mislead your readers. My next tip is to Google the titles you came up with. Google them and try to see if the same title comes up for something else. Like I mentioned before, titles cannot be copyrighted. You can share titles across media. You can have multiple books called the same. However, you don't want that. That's just unwanted competition. If the other book with your title is super popular, if people search for that title, the more popular book will come up, therefore your book will never come up. Obviously try to make your title as unique as possible that will show up first as your book and nothing else. The next step I want to talk about is to think of the series title if you're planning on writing a book series. Books in the same series have the same formula, use the same formula, and there are multiple ways you can do this. A lot of the times, especially with fantasy, the fantasy series will be called one thing and then each book in that series will be something else. You might think Game of Thrones is the series title, and honestly a lot of people refer to that series as Game of Thrones for obvious reasons, but the series is actually called A Song of Ice and Fire, and A Game of Thrones, it's only the first book in that series. But usually you will find that series have a separate name and then each book in the series has its own name, but they all follow the same formula so that they are easily marketable, so that a reader can recognize that all of these separate books are in the same series. So I'll just give you some examples. Again, with Game of Thrones, A Game of Thrones, A Clash of Kings, A Storm of Swords. The other way to do it is, instead of having a separate series title, is naming the series after the first book. An example I have in mind is the Divergent series. So it's called the Divergent series. First book is called Divergent, but then the other two titles in the series rhyme with the first one. They have the same formula: Divergent, Insurgent, Allegiant. So that's another way to do it, but it's totally up to you which way you want to go. But just think about it if you're planning on writing a series. Just something to keep in mind as well. Okay, so those are my tips on how to come up with a title for your book. Now I want to share with you guys some resources that I found very helpful in coming up with the titles for my books, and I think it might be helpful for you guys as well. First of all, I want to mention a website called fantasynamegenerators.com. I will link everything in the description so it's easy for you to find. This is a website that has a ton of different name generators. It's great if you're writing fantasy. Actually, it does have a section on book title generators as well, but obviously don't just pick something random if it doesn't relate to your book at all. But it is a great resource in general to come up with different names, and you might find words there that represent your book as well. That's a great one. I already mentioned thesaurus.com. Great way to find synonyms for your word. If you want more options for your title, that's a great way to find some other words. And the last resource I want to mention is word cloud generators, and specifically a website called wordart.com. Again, link in the description. This is a nice one where you can literally copy in your entire book or some chapters from your book, and it'll create a word cloud of the most used words in your book. And this is one way to find common words, common themes. There's a ton of settings. I'll put a picture of one that I created from the first 3 chapters of my novel Hunting Vienna, just so you can get an idea of what it looks like. But there's a ton of settings you can use, so you can remove all of the common words and prepositions and things like that, and yeah, you can play around with it. Make sure to check out these resources and try them out to see if they work for you, and I hope it helps you find the perfect title for your book. So yeah, there you have it guys. Those were all of my tips on how to come up with the perfect title for your novel. I really do hope some of these tips help you, and if they do, please let me know in the comment section below. Otherwise, if you already have the perfect title for your book, how did you go about finding it? Did it just come to you, or did you use some of the tips that I talked about today? I'd love to talk to you guys about that, so make sure to comment down below your method of coming up with the title. I'm sure everyone else watching this video would appreciate it as well. So if you like this video, please remember to like and subscribe, and check out some of my other videos on writing and publishing. You can find everything on my channel, and yeah, I hope you have a great day, and I'll see you next time. Bye!